everyone, welcome back. If you're coming back from watching the Singing Philharmonic's Aeolia musical analysis, welcome back. And if you are watching this one first, welcome. We're going to go through all the songs in the Ar Tonelico and Ar No Surge, Steel No Surge, Exapica universe in general. Today we are going to continue on with our analysis of the songs from Ar Tonelico 1, Hymnos Concert Side Blue. And we're going to talk specifically then about Chronicle Key. Or exec chronicle key. So here I have the from the Kurt Hymnith book that I have right here. We have the official track list, which you can of course find online for the Hymnos Concert Side Blue. So we started with Harmonic's Aeolia, and now we're moving on to Exact Chronicle Key. We did skip the Legend of Ar Tonelico just because we are skipping the non-vocal tracks. So when I flip the page, so first of all, notice the Legend of Ar Tonelico page here is blank. There's no lyrics. So when I skip ahead, the next song on the list is Chronicle Key, Exact Chronicle Key. I do want to point something very interesting out. This was discovered a long time ago and addressed by the musical director and series director in general, Tsuchiya Akira. So if you notice, if we look here, sorry, everything is mirrored. The title is Exec _ Chronicle _ Key, and then of course the /n period. That is not actually the correct way to write this title. And this has since been corrected. Obviously, it wasn't corrected in the print materials in the Kurt Hymnith lyrics book. But if you look for this song online, the YouTube videos have, most of them, the updated ones have the corrected title. If you look on the wiki, most of the pages have the corrected title. So what is this corrected title? So when these hymns were named, they are all adhering to a very specific convention. The first word or bit, I suppose, of the name is the function that is happening. So here we are executing a song. So we start with the exec. Later on, we add things like method. We'll get to all those and explain those as they happen. And then we have an underscore. And then we have any modifiers on that if we were to continue to use computer science language function call. This is where things like flip come in, which appear more starting with Ar Tonelico 3. And then we have another underscore, and then we have the actual song name. Now, songs can have multiple words in their name. This actually happens otherwise in Ar Tonelico 1. Rig Veda is an example of a song with 2 words in its name. If I skip forward in my lyrics book to Concert Side Red and I pull up, Renation is another example. And I pull up, say Renation, that's the one that came up first. You notice instead of an underscore, it uses an equal sign. Tsuchiya Akira came out and said Chronicle Key is indeed supposed to have an equal sign between chronicle and key, not an underscore, because the underscore actually serves a different purpose. So now if you didn't know that, now you do know. I have no idea. I haven't, I'll upload this video after I, preview it. I've changed some of my video recording settings to hopefully get the quality a little bit better than the pixelated garbage of the first video. The audio is what's most important, though. We have to admit that, right? This is analysis of the music. The audio is messed up. That's what's no-go. But I haven't decided if I'm going to go with the original or the corrected title, just in order to be consistent and when people search for the song, I want them to find the analysis. So let's talk a bit about what Exact Chronicle Key was meant. So this is the first hymn that we're talking about that is sung by one of the characters in the game. It's the second song we're talking about, so it obviously didn't take us long to get there. This song is sung by Misha Arcelik Loon. The important part is the Loon in Misha's name signifies that she is actually a clone of a character named Loon. In fact, Misha has been a long line of clones that have existed entirely for the purpose of singing the Exact Chronicle Key song. Loon was the first singer of the song. She and Sherelia partnered together to create the song. Sherelia crafted the song. Loon helped gather the emotions to put it together. And the emotions were meant to be pity for the character Mir, who the purpose of the song is to keep Mir trapped. In fact, the wiki page talks about uses the word lullaby actually for this, putting Mir to sleep in terms of sealing Mir to get there. The Ravitels that can sing this song are the descendants of Loon, as I said. These are specifically beta type Ravitels. There are three main types of Ravitels in the Ar Tonelico series. There are the origins. Shirelia, as I mentioned, is the origin for the first tower. We'll talk later on about Frelia and Tyria, who are the origins for the second and third tower. Coincidentally, Frelia and Tyria are also names of minor goddesses in the Ar Tonelico universe. Shirelia is not. Aeolia is the goddess counterpart. So that's why it's Harmonix Aeolia and not Harmonix Shirelia, because it's actually named for the minor goddess, not for the origin. Who knows why that's the case? I'll do more research on that as we get to Shirelia songs. And so the difference is the origin Ravitels and then the beta Ravitels are created, whereas then you have the naturally birthed Ravitels. So people can give birth and they carry a Ravitel gene, out pops a Ravitel. Those Ravitels don't tend to live very long. Those are the Ravitels like Orica that need the life extending agent. But origin and beta Ravitels tend to live quite a bit longer. Origin Ravitels live for an extremely long time. Beta Ravitels a decent enough time, especially in comparison to their very short-lived offspring counterparts. The beta Ravitels are made, in especially Misha's case, using something called the decellophane, which is where like the seeds of the DNA are extracted and put into to grow with a Ravitel. And interestingly enough, that is where the exact chronicle key song is stored, not in a hymn crystal like some of the other songs we're going to talk about from this game, but actually within the decellophane itself. So when Misha loses her decellophane, that's a really important part of the game because now that's the only way that someone can get a hold of the chronicle key song, and so it can be used against the party, and so they have to go and get the decellophane back. It also is partially why, it's entirely why there's a whole thing with Misha's age in the game, as the programming that's meant to allow Misha to sing the chronicle key also affects her age. So Misha is what's called a star singer. That's the nomenclature used in the game. She goes into the Crescent Chronicle and sings the chronicle key. And she is one of many Ravitels in the lineage of Loon who has sung the chronicle key before. As we'll talk about when it comes time to talk about Purger, even if you have the same basis of a song, the song can come out very different. So Misha's rendition of chronicle key has the same foundation as all the chronicle keys before, but it may sound different, and we'll never know because we don't know any of the other star singers. The game suggests that Misha is the 31st star singer. However, there has been about 400 years of time since Mira was sealed away, and based on the amount of time that the star singers have to sing, there is a little bit of discrepancy on how Misha can be the 31st. So if you're interested in wondering how that maths out, I recommend you go to the wiki article for Misha and Chronicle Key. It's very, very interesting to read. So let's talk about the song itself now that we know about the purpose of the song, and certainly if you played the game, you know the purpose of the song. So Tsuchiya Akira has said in a blog post, I've referenced some of his blog posts in the previous video, I'll continue to reference them, there's some really interesting material in there. He has mentioned that this was actually the first hymno song that was crafted. Not necessarily the lyrics, but the actual complete piece altogether. Shikata Akiko sent him over this song, he was excited, this was the first one that he had heard, and he was around, I think he was in the office, and he's like, I don't care who hears me, I'm going to play this and blast it on full volume, and some PR people are around, and they all listened to it, and everyone was really impressed, and it raised the morale so that they were all like super excited. Ooh, goodness. They were super excited for the project and how the game was going to turn out, and they were hoping that we all could feel that passion in the song. So it's really interesting that we're going to talk about this as the first hymn when it was actually the first hymn song that was finished. So that's a really interesting coincidence. The song in the game appears a couple times. The main time this song is sung is in reference to Orca singing Exec Linka, and her circumstances for singing Linka are also she's being tricked into singing that. And then Liner's like, hold up, some bad stuff's going to go down, Mira's going to get unsealed, Misha, you need to sing Chronicle Key, which is really interesting. Because Misha doesn't want to sing Chronicle Key. Remember, she was created for this purpose. And part of the game is like, I want to be a person. I just want to be a girl and go out and explore the world. And like, Liner, we hung out up in Platina. We were childhood friends and you don't remember me. And Liner, you're kind of a dumbass, which he is. He is very, very dense, if you remember. Clueless, just I don't know how he got the girls he got, but he did. But so Misha's not really excited to be doing this, but at the same time, this is what she was born to do and raised to do. So, she's not happy about it. She's depressed about it, but she knows her purpose. And in that moment, she knows she has to, like the world is going to end type of thing. She has to. And so reluctantly, she kind of sucks it up and does it. I mean, I'm simplifying greatly. There's a whole bunch of characterization with her talking about the trauma that she feels and just the despair, the isolation, the loneliness that she's not looking forward to. And I bring this up specifically because when Shikata Akiko received the scenario for this song, because that's what happened. She received the scenario and the lyrics for the song and then had to craft the song. The game's plot wasn't completely finished yet. She didn't have, character sketches. She didn't have the entire script written out, right? I mean, these items were being completed simultaneously because you can't do start, finish, start, finish, start, finish. The game will take 50 years to make. So she had received the scenario and the lyrics for the song so that she knew the idea. And so what she did, and this is really interesting, she talked about this in the same blog post that I mentioned. She had sent it in, and Tsuchiya Akira included in his blog post, that she turned all the lights off in her room and she just made everything just really dark and quiet and tried to get the feeling of this loneliness and isolation and despair that Misha must have felt, and tried to craft a really, really sorrowful, harrowing type of a song from it. And it's interesting because as we're going to listen in a minute, there are parts of this song that are actually quite upbeat and almost joyful sounding. So there's a really interesting juxtaposition, and that could reference, maybe Misha's feeling sorry for Mir, maybe she's feeling some sort of a kinship and like, look, you're lonely too, we can be lonely together. Maybe, she's feeling a bit of her purpose and she's fulfilling her purpose and that's giving her a little bit of pride. Certainly those aren't the prevailing emotions, right? Those definitely, her entire character arc in the game is about how she doesn't want to sing this song, right? I'm not trying to dismiss any of that. I'm just trying to justify some of the happier moments that we're going to hear. And then before we start, as I mentioned in the previous video, the hymnos lines, when it comes to the actual hymns that we're going to talk about, often start with a line talking about how the singer feels about the song. So Wasiarachis hymnos mi is one of the most common ones that we're going to hear. We actually saw that line in the last video. The line that we're going to hear is Wikira chis chronicle ki, which is the very first line of the song. We're going to hear it right away. It's different than Wasiera, and instead of saying Chis hymnos mi, she's actually name dropping the song. Take a drink. That's the joke we always make in our household. Wikira chis chronicle ki. So wikira, so it's very similar. The first two words are different. The ra and the last word is the same. But we means fairly much. So remember last time was was, which was very much. Here we're doing fairly much. We have ki instead of ye. Ki means that she's concentrating, whereas ye meant that she's happy. So she's concentrating fairly much and she wants this feeling to last. So it's kind of a neutral feeling, right? I'm just concentrating on it and I'm concentrating it pretty much, right? Like I'm not letting it I'm not super I'm super, super thrilled about it. I'm not in a trance, right? And I'm not happy. I'm not sad. I'm not scared. I'm just concentrating. I'm just vibing here, right? So it really exemplifies the fact that, she doesn't want to, but she knows she has to. So it's kind of that reluctant acceptance is kind of exemplified in this line. And then she's chronicle key. So I'm concentrating fairly much. I want this feeling to last because that's the only way Mir's going to get sealed, turning into the song chronicle key. Interestingly enough, if you look at the wiki, she only has to sing the song in about 12 hours out of the 24 hours. So I don't know why they have to shut her in the room. She literally could come out and eat and do other things and then go in and it's that's just me. That's just me. All right. So let's analyze. The song starts in the key of A minor, which is a key with no sharps and no flats. It is the sister key to C major. Every minor and major key they have sister keys. You can always find the sister key by moving 3 half steps. So if we start with C major, if you move 3 half steps down, you will get to the A minor scale. If you move 3 half steps up, you'll get back to the C major scale. And then the song is in 4/4 time, which is the most common bar in Western music, at least modern Western music. So we're not going to have that swaying, dancey feel that we had. We're going to have more of a 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Most common type of bar that you hear in like pop music. It provides a very predictable sense of rhythm. Okay, and then A minor is also a very common key, and we are going to transition back and forth between a few different keys in this song. You will notice that in the sheet music that we're going to talk about, but you'll also be able to hear a little bit of it as well. So let me put the video on here, and we will start. And before we get into the chorus, so that is the first verse. There's no pre-chorus in this song. And when I talk about verse, pre-chorus, chorus, some of those labels are arbitrary. It basically means, the parts that repeat so that we can label them. Here, between the verse and the chorus, there's no real other part to designate. So that's why I'm saying we're jumping right from the verse to the chorus. But interestingly enough, the chorus doesn't repeat the same way. We'll get to that later. So again, these labels are arbitrary. A lot of old classical music uses things like A part, B part, C part. I could very easily use those terms. And honestly, as the songs start to get more complicated, starting with Phantasmagoria, I've written my analysis for the entire 2 concert CD. So I know kind of how this is looking. By the time I get to Phantasmagoria, I'm just going to start using the A, B, C part notation just because it's easier to keep track of things, because things don't feel necessarily like a verse or a chorus anymore. It's going to happen all the time. But here, we still have that feeling like we have a solemn intro. We have what feels like a verse because it's just very linear, straightforward. Notice we started with very soft tones, right? We have a violin. We have some very traditional, like light, or not like big church organ, but just like a light, like maybe a synthesized organ or like a dulcimer, something very, very subtle sounding. And there's not a lot of harmony lines here yet either. Shikata Akiko singing in a very soft, like very, very subtle, soft, more of a pleasant tone, but it has a sorrowful sound, right? It has just, just a sound, not quite despair, but sorrow, just that little bit of sadness and pity, rather than outright, just losing it completely. Much more subtle sounding. So we do have some harmony that comes in during this first part. The harmony comes in very slowly. Obviously, because this is a vocal sheet music arranged, there's no, the violin isn't present, so we're going to jump right into the main vocal line. You can see in the time signature the 4/4 beat, and that there are no sharps and flats, which designates the A minor. And obviously, there's no argument here, right? There's no this is C major, this song sounds sad, right? Sometimes songs that they sound kind of happy, but they're still in a minor key. There's no argument here. This is one of the most clear-cut minor keys I've ever seen. Before we get into the chorus, I'm going to pause at the same point. I want to note 2 things. The first thing I want to note, actually I want to note 3 things. I'm sorry. I have some notes, and then I have things that come up during the video that I don't want to miss. First thing is notice that the harmony, when it comes in above the melody line. The melody line stays at that lower Just grande coqui and grande sustiusio wikila, right? Because it wants to repeat that same motif. But the harmony comes up as Wikila, right? It comes in at a higher pitch. This is really rare. We're going to hear this a lot, and depending on what music circles you're in, you may hear this quite a lot actually. But in standard music, we tend to think of harmony as being below the melody line. Remember last time I talked about how jealous I was of all the sopranos because they got the melody line, because it is usually the higher pitch that is the melody line. So this is kind of rare. The next thing I want to talk about is the idea of counter melody. You may notice, I don't think you can see my, you can see my mouse, fantastic. This part right here, notice the timing doesn't match, but it's meant to be a harmony of that melody line. Instead of having the running eighth notes, it is a series of a series of quarter notes instead, providing more of a counterpoint than an actual harmony. The melody line is a descending line, whereas the counterpoint is an ascending line. You're bringing in a little bit of juxtaposition, a little bit of tension. It causes you to pay more attention to it. It is a sign that something more complicated is coming. It is also a reference to classical music. A lot of the old composers, Bach, Beethoven, Mozart, all those, this was the kind of harmony that was used back then. The idea of using intervals like thirds, like I mentioned last time, that a third is the most common type of harmony, that sort of thing just didn't exist back in classical music right away. It wasn't until later classical music, 17th, 1800s, that people started using intervals for that purpose. Certainly you had old choral music with block chords in the Middle Ages, but the traditional thinking of Baroque and all those, it was all counterpoints. It wasn't harmony as we think of as harmony today. And so that is where this really comes into that sort of traditional Western influence. And the last thing I want to mention, do you note that accidental right before the chorus? And then there's a key change. That is a really common way to denote, to start modulating to a key change, is to have an accidental that leads us into that new key. Interestingly enough, the accidental, though, doesn't lead into that key. It is a G sharp, and yet an F sharp is what the key is going to contain because we are modulating into E minor. There is actually no key that is just a G sharp. In order to have a G sharp, you'd also need to have a D sharp and an F sharp as well. So that's a very interesting modulation. Also thinking that the corresponding major, the sister major key, is actually G major when you talk about E minor. You go into G major, and yet that's the note that was sharped. What? But accidentals often provide that tension to allow for a very quick transition. It's not always a smooth transition, but it is a quick transition nonetheless. And this verse has been building up by introducing that counter melody that doesn't always align, by slowly adding harmony and slowly ramping up. That adding that accidental is just that jumping point, and it's able to modulate to a new key really, really well. So as we get to the chorus, the song is going to start sounding a little different. And again, my use of the word chorus is a bit of a misnomer. I'm calling it the chorus just because that's the label that fits, but you could think of it as a part B. And again, I do want to mention, I forgot to mention this, unlike the previous video where the sheet music was based off the official hymn note, the rest, with one exception when we get to Ar Tonelico 2, the rest of the sheet music is all my own arrangement. So any errors are my fault, just based on what I could and could not hear. These songs can get pretty complicated. I did my best. Also 15 years ago, I don't really remember my line of thought and what I was thinking, so I can't necessarily explain all the time why I made certain judgment calls, but if I do remember, I'll make sure to say them. So we're going to go transition to the chorus now. We're going to pause right there because that's the end of that section. There is an end. I call this the chorus because it's the big, it's a big part. It's a part you remember. It's got some repetitive parts to it. And then later on, there's another part that's big with repetitive parts to it. And I call that like chorus version 2. We'll talk about that when we get to it. We have the addition of a lot of cymbal crashes. like cymbals like this, like cymbals like as an orchestra cymbal, not drum kit cymbal, right? Very much. Can't see that. Can't see that one. You know what I'm trying to get to, where it's allowed to, you hit it and you bring the cymbals apart and you allow it to ring, rather than you need to move on to drum beats. So sometimes you silence it. So it's big drum beats, and we introduce a full 4-part harmony. Now with this harmony, Shikata layered her vocals over and over and over, and so there's a couple ways you can do that when you layer your vocals. Certainly, you could get just multiple people singing each line, which she did not do. She recorded all of her vocals herself in all of her songs, and in fact, I believe it was when she was talking about Ar Tonelico 3, her bonus song on her, was it Leilania album, where she made Exec Carvastasia. She had 100 vocal lines at one point in that song. You might say, but there aren't 100, parts, like that would sound like chaos, and it certainly would. But, you record the same thing multiple times. Maybe you take breaths in different parts. Maybe you come at your microphone from different angles, so the parts sound like they're coming from different places in the room. You vary your tone to have a really bright tone, to have a really dark tone. Like, there are ways to change how your voice sounds, too. And she is employing a lot of that here, and especially she's doing a very... like a very traditional operatic sound here for most of it, a very dark sound, to contrast with the lighter sound when she introduced the song, right? We built up to this very, very almost church sounding part of this, where she brought everything in unison. So it's been interesting stylistic change that we're then going to actually move out of. And it happens right at the key change where we move into the key of E minor. So let's actually look at this. In the sheet music, I made a judgment call when I made the sheet music here. I could not hear if there was a bass line for the vocals. So I took the upper line and I just copied it down to make a bass line. This is really, really common. Sometimes instead of doing that, you just have the tonic of the chord for the whole measure. I thought that added too much dissonance that I didn't hear in the recording, right? This is meant to be a very solemn, any tension you feel is supposed to be tension of emotion, not tension of music, really. So I opted for that, but I am confident in the other harmonies. And one thing I want to note is on the last harmony, it is just a block. I'm playing an octave higher, obviously, block of fifths. But if you just take that top part, you have what's called a perfect fourth. And so if you just isolated, what if I picked just the essential harmony and just took that one line below the melody, and you obtain a fourth. And a fourth is actually a very interesting harmony line. It is very traditional in the pre-Middle Ages music. It used a lot, like I said, the early Middle Ages and pre-Middle Ages music, that was a lot of choral music, used this perfect fourth a lot. But as we moved, oh my gosh, this microphone's getting in the way. As we moved more towards, your Baroque and your neoclassical and et cetera, the fourth actually gained a reputation for being dissonant instead of being something that you resolved. You actually resolved away from the fourth rather than toward something like a fourth. And so that's just a really interesting note. Another thing I want to mention is a fourth is right in between two very, very different intervals. So if we just look at a standard fourth, right? I'm doing a fourth above this time instead of a fourth below to illustrate my point. A fourth lies right in between. If we go down a half step on that harmony line, we get that major third, that beautiful major third that we want to resolve to. Let's go back to the fourth. If we resolve up, we get something called a tritone. The most dissonant sound that music can make. It is exactly halfway in the scale. It's not even in the scale. It's actually the exact halfway point between two octaves. So if you take your perfect octave, which is when you have the same note on, at the beginning, the end of a scale. The note exactly halfway in between makes the tritone. And so you have an interval that's exactly in between the most pleasing and least pleasing intervals that exist in music. And so that is why the fourth has a harsh yet not unpleasant sound to it, because it's right in between those. And a lot of famous music uses it. You have Here Comes the Bride and Hark the Herald Angels. Those are very common examples of perfect fourths. This is using the fourth as the fourth below, which is a little different, but the same idea of, there are a lot of intervals that are fourths in this song. And it actually makes a lot of sense because this is a more solemn, more traditional, going back to that church and choral music sound, especially in the chorus, that it makes sense to draw from that as inspiration. But things soften a bit as we transition to the second verse. The second verse actually shares some melodies with the first verse, which is why I have called it a second verse. This makes sense in my mind. There's a little bit of a transition before that too, and you may have noticed before I switched back, there was a key change. We are going back into A minor here to mimic the structure of the verse again. But first we have a little interlude. I know that was a long section, and so it might be hard to remember bits and pieces going back as I talk about, but I wanted to do this whole section together because it all has the same sort of tonal feel. This actually felt kind of happy. Now, it's still in a minor key, certainly. It shares complete resemblance with the beginning, has that same da 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 melody, right? There's no difference there. So saying it's in a different key makes no sense. It's still definitely in that A minor key, but it sounds more upbeat. It sounds more happy. Maybe some more acceptance. Maybe some more pity for what Mary's going through. If you read the lyrics I do think are indicative of the slight tonal shift. We're not going to stay in this tone. The song is going to shift back into the darker tone for the chorus version too. But it is interesting juxtaposition there. When things like this happen in songs, it prevents the songs from being boring is not the right word, maybe overbearing in its mood. If something's just pulling you down and down and down and down, it can kind of bury you in it and can be hard to listen to. Having this juxtaposition and tonal shifts, especially if they make sense in the context of the song, allow these parts of songs to feel fresh when they arrive. Oh, I'm into the next part, I'm into something new. Really eases the listening experience. And as we go along, notice, first of all, we had that interlude. And that interlude, it was really interesting because there was no real defined melody. The vocal lines kind of went in and out and weaved a little bit, almost in the background, like they were an instrument. Something that we're going to notice with these hymnal songs is certainly there is a melody line. There are lyrics, right? That's why these songs exist, is they are being sung for a purpose. But a voice can also be used as an instrument, not just as a focus. And so that interlude, that transition into the second verse, used voices as an instrument rather than as a focus. And so that was a really interesting change. We're going to hear this a lot later on. There's going to be background chanting in songs in the future where where the vocals are used to provide rhythm. So it's going to be a very common theme that we talk about voices as instruments. Sometimes when we hear voices as instruments in songs, we hear them not necessarily with a defined conlang like hymnos, but composers like Kaji Ryuki use it with nonsense words, just because to emphasize the fact that this is not meant to be a focus. Like the lyrics don't matter. Whereas in this case, the lyrics do still matter when the lyrics are defined. So it is a less of a case than that, but it is something that is seen in other music and other soundtracks. And you may have noticed that sometimes the line, I left the harmony on this line or on this line, unlike the hymn note transcription I made. I had to decide what lines to put it on, and certainly there were parts where I needed all 5 lines, and certainly there are parts where I don't need all 5 lines. What I did is the first line is the clear melody line. Like if Shikata Akiko is singing by herself at any point, I'm putting it on that line. If that line continues on, I'm putting it on that line. And then I did your standard soprano 1, soprano 2, alto 1, alto 2. So going from highest to lowest. And I just kind of assigned the parts as I heard them based on kind of where they lied on that range. So if something went pretty high, like this line that you see right here, enough is kind of high, I put that on the top soprano 1 line. Earlier, you saw a line where the clef actually changed to bass clef because it was below the middle C. I put that on the alto 2 line. But really, this is personal preference. I could have condensed this a little bit in these parts, but I chose just to keep organized to keep this. Also because I didn't always, when I picked out, I literally clicked on the notes to put them in. I didn't play anything on the piano or sing or dictate or anything. I literally clicked on each note. It took forever. A single song, I did it. I was working at an internship and I had a lot of free time, so it was about 2 internship work days. I'm guessing about 10 hours for each of these, because not only did I have to listen and hear, I then had to click, and by the time I'd click a couple notes, I lost where I was, and just because it takes a long time to click notes on sheet music, it turns out. So it's arbitrary. There will be cases later on with the only Ar Tonelico 2 songs I did Frilia based on the hymn note, and I did Sphelia. Sphelia does at point that is 8 parts, and at times uses all 8 parts. But also there's call and response, so I kept those on separate lines. So, there are some reasons why some things are on separate lines, and they're just personal preference reasons. So that's why that's happening here, because this is a very sparse section. You had the beginning where things were intertwined a bit. Then Shikata Akiko sang on her own for a good 3 or 4 lines. And then we started gaining a counter melody where you have this part that goes, da 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 da. Da, 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 right? You have that part that was doing this descending line underneath it with 2 parts harmony, beautiful thirds. A lot of the harmony in this part are thirds, right? We're trying to be very gentle, very pleasant, almost upbeat. So we're using that common pleasing third. A third is the most pleasing harmony to your ear that you could have, often major thirds, but really the third has to fit in the key. And so whether, the third is major or minor is defined on, hey, which third has both notes in the key that I'm playing? That's the third I'm going to use. And they're both equally pleasing in that sense, because if you were to bring, if you wanted the major third every single time, but one of the notes in the major third is outside the key, you'd actually be adding dissonance and tension in that way, because keeping into the key is like the cardinal rule of, do you want things to sound resolved and pleasant? You keep in the key. So whichever third, major or minor, is in the key, because only one of them will be in the key. That is how you pick the harmony. So the most pleasing harmony, the most, general harmony, a little bit of that counter melody, kind of moving things along. So it's not just one vocal line, right? We see a little counter melody here as well, right? But in general, nothing too striking here. Everything is meant to pull you forward, give you this sense of ease and pleasantness, before we drop you into the second chorus with a key change. Now, there's very little of a transition here. The transition, it's off the side of my screen. There is no accidental to a transition. It just jumps right into the next key. But it makes sense because there is an entire tonal shift that's about to be happening. We are going to be changing, and as you can see, there's a little hint. There's no vocal line on the top line. It's just the bottom 4 lines, because I'm switching away from, hey, here's Shikata Akiko and her supporting melodies, to we're moving into the choral section back again, which is why I'm calling this chorus version 2. Also, Western music and Japanese music, and specifically Japanese pop music, treat choruses a little differently. In Western music, we often use the same melody and lyrics each time the chorus happens, whereas in Japanese music, it's actually more common to have the lyrics different, or even the melody different, the second time and the third time the chorus comes around, rather than keeping it the same each time. Japanese songs tend to just throw a whole bunch of lyrics at you. Every line is different, even if the part of the song is repeated. If the chorus repeats 4 times, you are more likely than not going to have 4 sets of lyrics to go along with it. And so just because of that context, even though it's a different melody and slightly different structure, it's the same tonality with that darker, solemn choral feature in the same key and with the same kind of repetitive nature. Like we're going to have like the same motif playing a few times. I'm calling this version 2 of the chorus. So let's listen to version 2 of the chorus. You can hear how that tonality mimics that earlier chorus. The choir bit comes in, you have the cymbals, sometimes a little bit of syncopation even to really drive it home. Syncopation is when you have something that's not quite on the beat. So you have bum, bum, ba, bum, bum, right? You have something that's not quite on the beat with the cymbals. You don't expect to hear that, so it really jars you. It really is like, oh, this is official, right? And so that is what's going on here. So that makes sense with it being a second version of the chorus. You've got a lot of those block chords. Block chords is when you have the full, all 4 notes, the 1, 3, 5, 8 of a chord coming on. The entire first chorus was nearly entirely block chords, just to allow for some movement and to eliminate some dissonance if a chord wasn't fully, because you can have a chord where the 1, 5, and 8 are in the key, but the third, whether it's major or minor, you want it to be minor, but only the major's in the key, so you just omit it. Happens a lot in guitar. You can play just like the first 2, like you do a block chord where it's just the first 2 notes, and you bring the first couple notes, right, on the guitar type of a thing. Very, very common to do those types of chords. So there are a few cases of that where the harmony just kind of carried over the previous note just to move on, because like the full chord's not quite in the key the way we want it to be. But in general, it's a lot of block chords, and that's what's going to happen in the sheet music too, to have that full choral effect. end on a fifth. A fifth is that block chord with the middle. Instead of doing 1 through 5, it's just 1, 5. It leaves a little bit of ambiguity if you're playing it just on its own without anything else going along with it, like right after a key change, like here, because you're not specifying if it's major or minor. You're not playing the third, and the third is what determines major or minor. Am I playing an A major chord, or am I playing an A minor chord? Now, we know that this is going to be an A minor chord because we are transitioning back to a key that we've already played in. Or are we? So there's some really interesting stuff happening with this outro where it's not quite in the A minor key, even though that is how I've written it and transitioned it to. We're going to hear some accidentals when we get there. So because we start off this outro sequence with the fifth of the A, I chose this as the chord, but whether this is an A major or A minor, we'll figure that out as we go. It's a really interesting way to think of this. Or whether it's something else entirely and we just start with that as the motif because that's what we're used to hearing. We'll get there. I have something written in my notes that looking at this doesn't seem to agree. I came up with this idea that I have in my notes for some reason. I wonder what that reason is. Or did I make a mistake? We're going to hear that. But certainly the accidentals coming up tell me that something a little more complicated is going on here. So let's go back to the original song here to hear the outro. Notice how that we'll talk about the sheet music, but notice how it reached a resolution there. If it would have just ended without the ooh, you wouldn't have gotten that resolution. It would have just kind of been left murky. Having those last 4 notes transition really allowed it to achieve that resolution. And like I've mentioned, music is all about tension and resolving that tension. And so you had that murkiness because this ending part here, the music, the vocal lines are kind of intertwining and being more atmospheric. So whether there's a true melody here at some point is really debatable, or whether it's just meant to be taken all as a whole. And so having that as a resolution kind of clears that up a little bit. So here's how this ending piece looks like in my arranged sheet music. It almost sounds to me like it's trying to transition here to C major. So that's a really interesting way to end the song. Certainly, it resolved to a C, so I would expect the C to be a tonic. It doesn't sound sad and sorrowful. The notes right before it make an F major chord, so ending in a major key makes sense. In fact, this could actually be, now it doesn't make sense for this to end up in F major and that be the key, because the F major key uses a B sharp. B flat. There's a lot of B's in this piece. Let's see. Right, I played 2 or 3 B's in that line itself. So F as the key doesn't make any sense at all unless those are all meant to be accidentals, and it's just too pleasant. It's too meant to be that those are the lines. So I wonder if this is meant to be, as I've written in my notes, C major as the outro, which is again a really interesting thing to note, because this is not a happy song, but this ending part as well as the verses had hints of this pleasantness. Now, C major is the sister key to A minor, which is what the verses were in and what we had originally assumed the post of the second chorus was transitioning to. So it makes perfect sense for this to actually be in C major instead of A minor. It gives that tonality, the tonal complexity. It's a phrase I want. instead of just going back and forth between the two minor keys. So for this to be in C major, makes perfect sense. Something else that makes a lot of sense, so this plays, as I mentioned in the game, in response to Orica singing Exec Linka. And so what happens in the game is Orica sings Exec Linka, you walk around and you're like, you hear it in the distance, you control liner. So literally you could just park the character somewhere and let the song play. And then you convince Misha to sing Chronicle Key, and you control liner again. I think you go into a battle at this point. It's been a long time since I played the game. You either go into a battle or you can choose to go up and talk to Orca. Either way, you have a point where you could just let the game run. And so this song in the game has to create a loop. A loop means that you start the song somehow, and then you designate part A, somewhere hopefully near the beginning of the song. You play the song for a while, and either at the end, sometimes it's at the end, you return back to that point A you designated earlier, or you stop before the end and you designate a part B. And you go back to part A and play until B, you go back to A, you play until B. The loop for this song is actually incredibly short. You start at the beginning of the song. You get that intro. You get your first verse. You get the first chorus. Then your A marker is not until after the first chorus, that transition to the second verse. When you loop back to that point. So the part that constantly repeats over and over, if you let liner just hang out, it plays that beginning part, intro, verse 1, chorus, and then it repeats over and over and over until you continue to play the game, or you lose power in your house and your PlayStation, or if you're emulating it, your laptop loses power. I don't know. The part that repeats is the transition to the transition to the second verse and the second chorus. You don't even get to the outro. And those two parts, about minute and a half, I'd like to say, that's what repeats over and over and over. So if you missed anything, like you really like that first verse or you really like the first chorus, you don't hear it again. Unless you go back to your save, or you go and you get the concert CD or the Kurt Himnuth box set. This is my most prized possession. I love this thing. I have opened it and used it so many times that part of the cardboard has ripped. But I got a first press of it before they fixed a couple typos, and I'm very proud of it. And you never hear the outro in the game at all. Never. This is going to be a common theme. Some hymns in the game just cut out the outro or the intro, like Replikia cuts out the outro and the intro. But some songs cut a good chunk, and the loop sometimes makes no sense whatsoever. I would think in this song, you'd want to loop from maybe right before the outro back to the first verse, right? And have a longer loop including both choruses. I don't know why the decision was made this way, but the decision was made this way. So that is the analysis of Exec Chronicle Key. I hope you found that informative and interesting. Again, as a disclaimer, that arrangement is not an official arrangement. That is an arrangement that I wrote 16 years ago in MIDI, painstakingly clicking every note as I heard it. Mistakes are my own human mistakes, either because I misclicked or because I heard something wrong. I did actually take this arrangement years ago with a very bad quality microphone. It might even have been my laptop surround area, because I was on a MacBook Pro and they have that room microphone. Might even been that. But somewhere in one of my hard drives, I actually have a 5-part harmony recording I made of this song. It sounds wild. I mispronounced a lot of hymnos that I realized after the fact. I said, Wikira Kis Chronicle Key, No, I think I did X instead of Chis. Really, really bad. I didn't know what I was doing. I've learned a lot in the last 16 years. If anyone's interested in that, I can maybe try and dig that up and find it. But for now, we're going to stick with just the analyses. If you have any other insights you want to share, if you want to ask me questions about anything that I came up with, please post a comment below. I will not be sharing these MIDI files for now. YouTube is really wonky with links. This could be something where if people really like this and, want to create some sort of hub for some of the files and things, sure, I'll stick them, maybe stick them there like on a free Patreon tier or something. But we're just starting this thing. I don't want to make any promises or grow this bigger than it would organically be. So for now, I'm just not going to share them. And we can cross that bridge later when we get to it. But I do hope you found it interesting, enjoyable, and you have come up with things to ask me about or share with me. Maybe your feelings on this song, your feelings on Misha as a character. I gotta be honest, I picked Misha my first time through. I just love her character design, and I loved the inner struggle she had about Chronicle Key. But I love all the characters in all the Ar Tonelico games, and certainly I played through all the endings, so I got to know Orca and Shirley a lot more throughout the game. It's just Misha was... But you also get more time with Misha at the very beginning, too. You meet Orca first, but then Orca gets scared and runs off, and then you meet Misha, and she's like, hey, do you remember me? How do you not remember me? And like, she really gets in your face, and it's kind of like endearing. And she's the first fairy tale you dive into, so you get a little bit of a deeper connection with her right away, and so I latched onto that. But I do love all the characters in the Exapico universe. But maybe tell me a bit about your connection with Misha, whether you picked her or not right away, and how you feel about the song. See you next time. Next time, we'll do, I think it's York of Love is next. I'd have to go back to my list. I have all the notes right now and ready to go, but we'll see you next time for that.